Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to New Books in Economics, a podcast channel from the New Books Network. I'm Peter Lawrenson, an associate professor of economics at the University of San Francisco. So when we think about China's future prospects for economic growth, we often focus a lot on hot areas and industries like the low-end, export-oriented manufacturing sector that drove growth for most of the past few decades, or the AI-fueled tech boom of recent years. But for any country, one of the most important determinants of the long-run economic growth is human capital, the education and health of its workers. Our guest today, Yanzhong Huang, has written an important book on China's environmental health crisis, examining not only its effects on people, but also the political and institutional barriers that have made it a hard problem to solve. The book also provides a great window into the way the Chinese system works in general, as the problems it outlines recur across a variety of economic and other policy areas. Yanzhong is a professor at Seton Hall University and director of its Center for Global Health Studies and a senior fellow for global health at the Council on Foreign Relations. Among his many other accomplishments and credentials, he received his PhD in political science from the University of Chicago and is a member of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations Public Intellectuals Program. And his book is called Toxic Politics: China's Environmental Health Crisis and Its Challenge to the Chinese State. So, Yanzhong, thanks so much for joining us. Now, when people think about political science, public health is usually not one of the first topics that springs to mind. So how did you get interested in this broad area? I know you've been working on it for many years, even before this book.
Interesting question. Actually, this morning when I was giving a presentation at the Johns Hopkins University Science event, I was talking about the impact of the COVID, on U.S.-China relations, and it was also time to celebrate the release of that book, on engaging China, the 40 or 50 years of history, to recognizing the achievement of Professor Mike Lampton. It was a long time faculty member of the Johns Hopkins University. In fact, I was found it is interesting because Mike's research, his dissertation was about the politics of medicine in China in the Mao era. And so what I did when I was a PhD student at Chicago, I was entertaining all these ideas and what I should write on for my dissertation. And then my mentor, Dali Yang, just told me, why don't you write something on health? I thought initially it was sort of a crazy idea. To be honest, because who would expect a political scientist to write on public health? But after I read Mike's book, I realized there's a lot a political scientist could actually write on in terms of the health politics in the post-Mao era. So my work was basically built upon Mike's work, even though the focus is on the post-Mao health politics. So that's sort of like nurtured my interest in the study, health issues from a governance, foreign policy, and national security perspective. So now I have this bifurcated interest. Right, on the one hand, I'm interested in global health issues, but in the meantime, also have a regional interest in China.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I mean, certainly, obviously, these days, I think politics and public health have been much more intertwined in a lot of people's minds since the pandemic. But it's great that you were able to connect to this area early. And of course, as we all do as academics or in any other kind of intellectual endeavor, you're always standing on the shoulders of giants and trying to make your own individual incremental contribution to bring things up to date and keep track of how things are developing. All right. So your book is about the environment and public health. And so in the U.S., when we think about China and the environment, we usually think about climate change since that affects us directly. It's in the news here all the time. Why don't you first tell us more about what are China's other environmental problems that you focus on in the book, and how are they affecting the Chinese people?
Well, actually, speaking of climate change, right, certainly what sometimes we confuse is too, right, that this, the contributor, right, to the greenhouse gases, most of them actually not considered, right, the pollutants, that causes air pollution, right? The issues like PM 2.5, the ozone. This is actually not a major contributors, to greenhouse gas effects, right? So here, but the book is focusing more the pollution, right? Air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution in China, even though it also tries to shed light, this policy process in terms of China, how to deal with this climate change, because, these two, even though there are differences, they are still interrelated in terms of, that, if you consider the corporate of the air pollution, right, like this fossil combustion, right, they themselves also an important contributor to the climate change. So, I want to focus on the three major links, air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution. And I found, indeed, this pollution, this has been a major um, uh, environmental health hazard in China. If you look at the outdoor air pollution, right, it is considered the largest single environmental health risk because it's linked to 1.24 million premature death in China. That accounts for nearly 40% of the global total. Right? And of all the risk factors for pollution associated mortality, this ambient PM 2.5 is actually the number one killer. Right, it is responsible for more than 1.1 million deaths. That is 1/4 of the total global attributable death, and 21.8 percent of the attributable global disease burden. Right, this is in China. So this the pollution has indeed been a major challenge to China's environmental health. There's other challenges, that associated with like food safety, right? Because pollution right now is increasingly also a food safety issue, right? China has a saying, that for the emperor, the people are everything, right? For the people, food is everything. But if you look at right how that the food safety, right, the issue in the country. There was a study in 2002. They found that in one of the few nationwide food safety tests, right, the Ministry of Agriculture might found that nearly 28 or 29% of the rice samples, were laced with levels of lead, that exceeded national safety standards, and 10% of them had excess, cadmium. So all this, that has also important, profound implications for China's future.
Yeah, so the food safety issue. So it's not just I think I've thought more commonly of food safety as being about introduction of pathogens, or obviously the prominent case where there were plastics introduced into milk, which were harmful to children, into I think powdered milk. But you're saying there's also, even if everyone is kind of perfectly honest along the way, once you grow the plant or something, but if the soil or water in which the plant is grown, or in which the animal feeds is polluted, then you're still it's tainted from the start. Huh?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so this is how that when we talk about food safety, it's not just about adulterated food, the melamines, the chemicals, being like mixed in the food, but also the pollution, right? The contamination, contaminated soil and water itself is contribute to the problem.
Right. And once it enters the food network, that's also, I was thinking, one of the reasons why I think air pollution became a particularly big issue is because it's just so hard to avoid, right? Rich or poor, you have to deal with polluted air. Dirty water, then the rich people can filter it, buy bottled water or whatever. and food, you can cook it and stuff, but yeah, if there's poison in just everything around you all the time, there's no way to avoid it, and it's hard to feel safe, no matter how privileged you are in other respects.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so there's huge health impacts from this. Other than straightforward public health impacts, are there other effects from this pollution problem on China or its relations with other countries?
Well, I think we just talk about the health implications, right, of the those environmental challenges. But in the book, I also addressed the economic, right, social, political, and foreign policy implications. Of China's environmental health issues. You are the economist, right? You know better than I. This the economic cost of pollution, right? Because if you use the I think Tom Schelling developed this it's a good value of a statistical life or VSL to measure, right, how much people are willing to pay to reduce the mortality risk. Right? If we use that to measure the China's economic cost of pollution, right, the annual the growth of total welfare losses, due to premature mortality caused by this exposure to air pollution, during 1990 and 2013 was estimated to be 11%. And the World Bank estimated that China lost 10% of the GDP to air pollution alone in 2013. But if we include the cost of the non-fatal illness, the total cost could be up to, according to my calculation, 18% of the China's GDP, right? And it would be even higher if we consider the losses associated with water and soil pollution, right? Beijing, the U.S. AmCham, they conducted this annual study, on the executives, U.S. The executives, right, of companies, in Beijing, they're asking them, what is the top challenge, for them, trying to recruit and retain talents to work in China. They actually for consecutive 3 years, right, that they name it the air pollution as the top challenge, right? They also, right, the social, political consequences. It is that even the Chinese government, also admitted, right, that that is, not just a complicated scientific problem; it is a sensitive social problem. Uh, it matters to societal harmony and stability. The government, legitimacy, even national survival or prosperity. So that's there's the if you look at the number of this environmental related petition letters and complaints, right, between 1995 and 2015, right, it increased significantly from basically, right, the less than like 100,000, right, in 1995, to close to 1.8 million, right, in the country, right. And in the meantime, this environmental health crisis has an international dimension. It's not just because it has an international origin, right, but also because China's, right, this environmental health problem, can have spillover effects. There was, this study in 2014 by using the 2006 data, for air pollution in China. They found that when strong winds blew across the Pacific Ocean, those pollutants, produced by China's export sector accounted for at least, at worst, right, 4% to 6% of the carbon monoxide, recorded in the Western United States. Assume that's in California, that's where you stay now. Up to 11% of the black carbon pollution and 12% to 24% of the sulfate concentrations. So this is there's the impact on also on international relations and global governance. And interestingly, the China's efforts to like close factories, mines, to reduce the pollution actually only drove up the prices of coal, steel, and aluminum in 2017, that in the international market. And so that is a very complicated global governance challenge.
Well, actually, let me back up just a sec. So you mentioned petitions, and since this is economics channel, so not everyone here is going to know about this very unique sort of Chinese system. So what is the petition system, and why is that significant? Like, in China, there's a billion plus people, so a million sounds like a lot, but I mean it's a million what, and what is this system? How does it work?
Well, this is those petition letters and complaints officially recorded right in the China's the system of reporting, right, the Ministry of Environment, until like 2015, they had this system, basically uh, conducted the so it's basically tally, on those the number of people who wrote petition letters and complaints, to the government. Because in China, certainly, right, we know, right, that when the people were responding to the issue of pollution, right, environment and other environmental issues, many people, or I would say most people, would choose, just to, like complain, informally, right? This is sort of like what Albert Hirschman called this the loyal, right? That they would not officially, right, complain to the government. So that itself takes the courage to do so, and it should be seen as an indication of how strongly they feel about the pollution, the challenge of the environmental challenge in China.
Right. So this might be a letter written by someone who says, "Hey, there's the river next to my house is black and mucky and smells like petroleum," or something like that. Or they might get a group petition together and have 20 or 50 or 100 people sign it and say, we're all really worried about this new factory that's going in, things like that.
That's right. That's right. So there could be like it's the initial, but until like 2010, most of that is like there's complaints in the form of petition letters, right? But after 2011, with the spread of the internet, like we have seen more of those complaints take the form of those the electronic, right? Like online complaints, or just cell phone calls.
Okay. Well, so, all right. So the people are upset. The health impacts are severe. The Chinese government is worried about the long run economic impacts of this as well. But, when we hear about China, we usually hear about it being a dictatorship and about the government forcing people to do what it wants, even in violation of, Western ideas of human rights. They can impose a one-child policy. They can shoot protesters in the street, put minorities in camps, imprison Nobel Prize winners, or smack down their most high-profile internet entrepreneur when he's disrespected them. Or to put a more positive spin on it, they were able to impose a lockdown and bring the coronavirus under control much more rapidly and effectively than in the U.S. So it seems like they have the power to do whatever they want to. So why are they having trouble stopping pollution?
Well, well, that I think you're right. That there's we often talk about this top-down approach, right? The Chinese government and the Chinese people are very proud, that one of the advantages of the system is this ability to concentrate forces, right, to do so-called big things, but that for a long time, this issue of pollution, other environmental challenges, right? They have been there, but it has not been really right, elevated, as agenda item until after the end of 1990s, right? And China has not really launched an all-out war on pollution, right, until after 2013. So first of all, right, you have this 4 decades of rapid industrialization, modernization, that basically contribute, to all this, these problems, right? This, you look at the scale and scope, right, of this pollution in China, right? During 2011, 2013, right, China consumed more cement than the United States did in the entire 20th century, right? It consumes 21% of the energy in the world, right? So, to tackle the problem pollution in China, we have to keep in mind, this huge, tremendous challenge, right, that the government has to deal with, right? Not to mention there, but there's institutional reasons, that were very resistant, right, in terms of these efforts, to clean, right, the environment, because we know, right, that, after in 1989 in particular, right, the CCP, right, that needs to continuously justify its rule, by not just sustaining rapid growth, but also consistently accomplishing concrete policy goals. So that reliance on the performance-based political legitimacy encouraged this single-minded pursuit of economic growth to the detriment of the environment, and the health of the people. Right? So at the local level, this ability to generate economic growth or fiscal revenues was the most important determining factor, right, in local officials' upward career mobility, right? So you have, on the one hand, the tremendous challenges, right, that the government has to learn to deal with. But in the meantime, you have all this resistance, the institutional resistance, right, on preventing, right, the pollution control to being elevated onto the government agenda, right? So I think when we talk about uh, the lack of progress in fixing the environment, we have to take into account that context.
So I think what I hear you saying is a little bit. I was reminded of, in I think in the early '90s, I think Larry Summers, when he was the chief economist for the World Bank, got himself in a lot of trouble by either writing or at least signing his name to a memo that pointed out by at least a very narrow economic logic that a lot of poor countries should be perfectly happy to pollute because, you know, asthma is not good and maybe you lose a couple of years of life, but if you, get the resources to build schools and roads and put a roof over your head and, get yourself a car or television for the first time, maybe that's a trade-off that people are willing to make and that's in some sense in their interest. Now, I think he lost his job for that one, but but in a sense, what I hear from you is there's a little bit that they didn't solve the problem. It sounds like both at the top levels of the Chinese government, they said economic growth is what we need, and even at the levels of that was the command coming down, but also that was the pressure coming up. Ordinary people weren't saying no, please don't put a factory here. They were saying you know we want the factory, and they weren't that concerned about pollution.
Yeah, so well, I think Larry Summers, had well, was certainly what was said something, right? This many of the developing countries, that like China initially, right, the war. Indeed, were thinking about, right, when the Western countries were calling for the China and other developing countries to also care about the environment, while the pursuing economic growth. But at that time, when that the country was this the sole concern was by economic development. It was to fulfill this needs and demands for basic necessities, right? It is understandable, right? Those environmental issues will become like a back burner issue, right? But but people's expectations change, right? As China grows, become more prosperous. The people also, they have their expectations, change. Well, they will no longer value those basic necessities, right? They are started to value increasingly, right, the importance of health, other like needs like leisure, right? The this is also measured by this VSL, right? This value of statistical life approach, right? They find that initially, right, that this the people are willing to pay like 1 million yuan, to reduce the mortality risk, right? Uh, but now, but I'm just cut this. So, um, uh, Peter, I think I made a mistake, by citing the data. Uh, I think if we will look at the studies, the surveys conducted by Chinese economists, right, in Shanghai and Chongqing in 2005 and 2006, they found that the value of statistical life, that is an estimate of how much people are willing to pay to reduce mortality risk, right? It was approximately 1 million yuan. That is about 122,000 US dollars. That was actually much greater than what is implied by the those the this other approach, right? That suggests that the the to measure how much people are willing, right, to
Hmm.
pay to reduce the mortality risk or losses of pollution, right? This is like a 280,000 yuan, right, or 34 around $34,000. But more recent studies suggested that Chinese residents are willing to pay an average of 3.8% of their annual household income to reduce PM 2.5 concentration by just 1 micrograms per cubic meter, right? So you have seen what this is actually people, right? They're willing to pay more in order to reduce the pollution, and that expectations, right, that this increasing need for better, high quality air by itself, right, is now pushing for government to make changes by the environment, to improve the air quality, because
Hi,
there's
just
this
coming back. We had a
legitimacy
little bit of a
concerns.
technical glitch that hopefully we'll be able to iron out in the editing. But the next question I wanted to ask was in terms of the China's environment. You've mentioned so all these problems they faced, but some of it seems like a little bit like the old story. So maybe they didn't prioritize environmental health as much because they were both citizens and the government were really oriented towards you know. Sort of a non-green GDP, just good old-fashioned economic growth. Having a bigger house, a better stuff than they did, and felt pretty successful when they looked at their lives compared to the lives of their parents. But now that's changing. People are really less concerned with their basic material well-being and are much more concerned with, especially in the urban middle class, are much more concerned with environmental and other kind of soft aspects of development, um, and also the government is more concerned with that as a long run consideration. So now there's more priority on it, and also the general assessment of Xi Jinping is that he has a lot more power than any individual leader for quite some time. So when he really cares about an environmental issue and he decides to take action on it, what kinds of challenges does he still face that keep him from fixing a problem if he decides he wants to?
Yeah, that's the thing. That is a great question. I think certainly, right, that when you have like what I call, or many other political scientists called a bandwagon polity, right? There, you have a superordinate actor, right, in charge. Then the other political actors, look to, him as, like the bellwether, that eager to jump onto his bandwagon to, to show their loyalty and support, right? That actually facilitates policy implementation, especially right if the leader right that shows clearly right this is my priority, right? This the so that you're going to find that this policy discrepancy, right, between the leader and the lead and the led is going to be significantly reduced. But that being said, that China, continue to face challenges in terms of enforcing this pollution control, because right, one of the challenges is that issue of legitimacy, right? You have to continue to justify um, the its ability to rule, by delivering right this concrete, the social economic goals, right? The fulfillment of those goals, that is not just about social progress in terms of the pollution control, but also when we talk about the economic progress. Unfortunately, right, even with all those calls on green GDP, right, that this pursuit of the GDP growth, continued to be a very strong incentive, right? That leads to the local government officials, to pursue robust economic growth, sometimes to the detriment of the environmental quality. Right? That is particularly a concern, right, in the post-COVID era in China, because they have this strong push, right, to recoup the losses associated with the pandemic. So you are seeing that they have issued more permits to coal-powered plants, right, in 2020, than in 2018 and 2019. The steel production has reached a historically high level, more than 1 billion tons now, right? Even though the government is concerned about those so-called excessive the steel production capacity, trying to crack down on those the steel mills. Some provinces trying to to produce the steel without the government permission. There's but this remains the concern in China. That they have find for example the this I think in March, just March this year, the 4 steel mills failed to implement production curbs during even the heavy pollution days. They were also found to have
So what happened
falsified
to those guys? So I guess
production
that's because what I think
records.
of, I mean, of course,
So
in any
there's a
country, especially one as big as China, I can imagine there's going to be people who want to work around the central orders. It's not formally federalist, but sometimes it's been compared to a little bit of a federalist system where there's some independence down below. But these days, given that if Xi Jinping or people acting on his behalf, if he really cared about the issue and he said, "Hey, shut down the steel mills or pause them when the air is extraordinarily unbreathable," and they don't, were there any consequences for the people who snuck around and kept the mills open?
well, Well, they have this is again, this is a top-down approach, right? They have sent inspection teams, right? That's the to the local level, just to enforce the government, the environmental control, the pollution control measures. They were indeed, but there were local government officials, who neglect their duty of environmental protection would be disciplined. Some were even even lost their jobs. But the thing is that as long as systematic level, right, the risk of being caught, and the cost, right, of being found, to uh, uh, to to have not follow the government the environmental rules and norms remains lower, right, than the
they're not being harsh enough with these guys. So they're
well,
saying, yeah,
let
sure,
me
I know
put
that
it
this
this
rule is
way,
going to be
sorry.
broken, but
uh,
maybe worst case, I'll be transferred to another job, or they'll punish me or fine my factory a little bit, but the odds are relatively small. And whereas I guess the certainty of, like, if I shut down the factory for a month, all these unemployed people are going to riot in the street, or I'm not going to make my GDP growth quota for this year or something like that, and that's going to hurt me too. So they just go ahead and take the risk.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, right, as long as the odds of being found, right, it remains small, as long as the cost, right, of these the not honoring the government environmental rules remains low, and if you could, being asked to like temporary shutdown, then later you could reopen, right, this is all like going to send a signal, right, the cost is really not as high, as when you compare to the benefits, right? The of excessive
Right.
production,
Okay.
that
Well, so
causes
okay, so even
pollution,
even
more
uh,
pollution
even
in
the
the
mighty Xi
country.
Jinping doesn't have all the power that he wants, and maybe he's got a little bit. It sounds like he and the other top leadership have a little bit of mixed feelings about how much they really want to tamp down economic growth. Kind of like in the U.S., right? We everyone says individually, like, I want clean air, but you also want a job. And when it comes down to, like, clean air, for everyone versus a job for me, maybe I'm going to choose my job first. But what about from the bottom up? Do citizens have any power to push for change in China? Has there been any developments or success stories in that front? I mean, successful protests or NGOs that can push back when maybe if these local governments are not doing what the central government says that it wants.
Well, if you look at the social participation, right, even though, right, when the China launched that war on pollution in 2013, that it officially encouraged the social participation, right, in the process of the pollution control. But we know that after 2012, right, the civil society organizations, has this in terms of the participation process, policy process, have overall being discouraged, right? As it's no there are maybe still, right, the civil society organizations promoting for environmental protection, like margins, IEP, right? But overall, they are the numbers are small, they are their ability to participate effectively in the policy process remains, like negligible. This is again, it's a very top-down process. That in fact, the COVID-19, right, that this government response, just to demonstrate, that how, that this top-down approach worked, right, in dealing with a major crisis again, right, that would reduce the incentives for engaging, the civil society organizations, right, in pollution control. Not to mention, that in terms of tackling pollution, right? There is no strong like consensus, right? In China, even among the Chinese public, right? That this is something we got to do, right? This is something that this the government needs to,
Right.
right,
So there's progress in the
prioritize.
sense of making it more of an issue, or taking it more seriously than it did in the past, but and then maybe the central government has a little bit more leverage than it did, but at the same time, it's also undercut a lot of the sort of developing civil society elements that kind of in the 2000s were starting to mobilize on behalf of environmental protection, and so now those kind of bottom up forces have been weakened relative to where they were before.
Yeah, I think this is the major difference, right, between what this the environmental protection movements, right, here, right, in the United States, and that if there is such a movement, right, in China, right, the U.S. is more like a bottom-up process. In China, it is more a top-down process. This is how that maybe in 2000. 15, 2016, you would still have the hope, right? Even at the government officials also
Hmm.
hope, right? After the Chai Jin's documentary, Under the Dome was released, right? The newly appointed environmental minister, congratulated her, right? Those I think she was hoping that was going to galvanize social forces, pushing forward the environmental the protection agenda, But once that this so-called this the China's the uh, gee, uh, I was trying to remember the name of that book.
It's okay if you remember it.
This the yeah, it was so it was like very just within weeks, right? You find how this documentary was taken removed from online. So this is just a essentially shattered all the this hope, right? This you can expect, right? This effective social participation,
Right.
right?
Yeah, so
In
for people who don't
China's
know it listening, just
pollution
this was
control
Chai Jing was a very
process.
prominent journalist in the state controlled media system, and she and correct me if I get any of this wrong, Yanzhong, but she put together a documentary movie with various collaborators about the impacts of air pollution, and really it kind of spread through the country like wildfire, but then which gave people a lot of hope that this issue would be addressed more seriously and would create pressure on the government. But then it was pretty much taken down and made off limits to discuss after not a very long period of time. And would has there been anything from the sort of journalistic side? Has anyone else done anything comparable? Like, is there still any investigative journalism uncovering when there are major health hazards that the political system or an ordinary kind of monitoring didn't uncover, or have they been pretty much stopped?
Well, yeah, we know that this kind of investigative journalism is very important, right? The contributor, right, to the U.S., right, the environmental, environmentalist movement, right? It's that you would that hope that same could happen in China. There was the actual time when we have seen those investigative reports, right, in China, uncovering the health impacts of the environmental challenges, but nowadays environmental journalists themselves become endangered species. I don't even know there are you know really any who should be categorized as the, like real environmental, but this or journalists who are conducting, right,
That's sad to hear. Yeah, I
environmental,
hadn't heard of anyone for quite a while, but
investigations,
I was
right,
hoping that I'd
in the
maybe
sense,
missed some more positive developments. But it sounds like I didn't. Well, so that's you paint a pretty worrisome picture. But again, for anyone listening, this book is a great way to not only learn about the environmental challenges in China and how that may affect China's development in the coming years, but also to understand the political system, the institutions there, the constraints that keep even a leader as powerful as Xi Jinping from fully carrying out policies that he might want to carry out, and that's very relevant. As we think about like what commitments they make about trade deals internationally, or when we work together on global climate change. If they can't even implement something that they want, then what is that? Certainly suggests there are going to be real constraints on the ability of the Chinese government, no matter how fearsome it sometimes seems, in its ability to carry out agreements that it's made with other countries, even if it fully intends to, which of course is also sometimes also a question. So why don't we move on from the book and what are you working on now? Seems like there's obviously endless fodder for thinking about health in China. Are you still working in this area, or are you moving on to some new topics?
well, I'm planning to start working on my next book. Hopefully in the summer, I could start writing on the China. Well, this is the book I have been thinking about working on for a while. I just didn't find the time to write it. This the book. It's called "The Politics of Infections in China." Basically, I want to examine, the China's response to major disease outbreaks, from SARS to COVID-19, and of course, by it's just now that we're still in this pandemic, the China's response has been phenomenal, right? And so there will be a large chunk of the book will be devoted to China's response to COVID-19. So that I will focus on the politics of China's pandemic response, and in terms of how the government respond to initial outbreaks, why they failed to nip the crisis in the bud, and how then this policy, this the reverse cause, that enable the government to take decisive and effective actions, right, to you know, basically model through the crises, and in the case of COVID-19, even emerge from the crisis triumphantly and forcefully. So there's a lot to talk about, and what I found interesting is that when you look at the pattern of the government response to the COVID-19, right, again, right, it's that policy pattern is no different from no, not fundamentally different from its response to like population control problem or pollution control problems, and there's no fundamental change in the public policy process. That when you compare that to the more era, despite this efforts being using high tech means, right, the and efforts try to institutionalize those mobilizational efforts.
So, Yanzhong, as one final question, I just wanted to hear from you if you had any other recommendations of good books to read or other things that people interested in your topic should look into.
Well, I think the book I plan to read this summer is the one just, I believe, published by Penguin. I think it's titled "The Plague Year: America in the Time of COVID." It's written by Lawrence Wright. Might have heard of Lawrence Wright, who's just published this long piece in New Yorker, which I believe is a condensed version of that book. I found that this account, right, of the COVID, how it's unfolded, not just in China, but this how it impacted the United States, and the entire world. This is very fascinating and authoritative. So I would, if we want me to recommend a book to read, I would, suggest this one.
Great. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And certainly it's all on our minds. Although I'm certainly looking forward to getting your next book once you have time to bring a academic scholarly perspective to and all your existing knowledge of China's health sector to bear, and then tell us more about what there is to learn and what insights can be gained from understanding China's COVID response. I'm going to throw in a recommendation too. My recommendation, just for people who are interested in, from the economics perspective, thinking about this as human capital, the other big aspect of what we call human capital is education. And another great book on that topic that just came out recently is by Scott Rozelle and Natalie Hell on Invisible China. And it looks particularly at the shortfalls in rural education in China, which is still the vast majority of the population, and the despite the best great stories about the top schools in Shanghai, once you get out in the countryside, the quality of what students get, even if they complete school, is very limited. So this book gets into a lot of the issues there.
It sounds very interesting because it reminds me how, when we talk about this upward mobility, I remember the days when I was a kid, right, in rural China, right? Because I went to certainly it was, a school, that's in the countryside, but, even you could say, well, the urban kids, they received better education, right? Those, we're not on the same foot, but, it's still, I think that the system seems to provide, certain equal opportunity, even for, kids like me, could get into, one of the best colleges in China, so, I don't know what's the situation today, to what extent this has changed, and make things worse or better, so I look forward to also reading that book as well.
Yeah, well, I won't spoil the whole thing. I think part of it is, a big issue is that, all the families have left the countryside, so that the children are often just being raised by grandparents who don't have the energy or skills to educate them. And then also the educational needs are much higher. So, there's always been exceptions like you who, can come from humble beginnings and obviously rise to really high levels of academic achievement. But I guess on average, the situation is still pretty dire. Anyway, but I'll leave that maybe for another podcast or for people to pursue on their own. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me and having this conversation. It's been really informative. And again, hope everyone will go out and get your book, and we'll all be eagerly waiting your next one.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure speaking with you.